State of Israel. Israel is a country in Western Asia that lies on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. Lebanon to the north, Syria to the northeast, Jordan and West Bank to the east, and Egypt to the southwest define its borders. Israel's terrain is diverse. Mountains, desert, and a rich river valley make up Israel's incredible landscape diversity. The largest city or capital of the country is the Jerusalem. The place also considered as the birthplace of the Jewish people, the location of the final version of the Hebrew Bible, and the origin of Judaism and Christianity. Israel boasts a booming economy, important religious landmarks, and strained relations with many of its Arab neighbors. Israel defines itself as a Jewish and democratic state, as well as the nation-state of the Jewish people in its basic laws. When it comes to the country's language, the official languages of Israel are Hebrew, Arabic, and English. Hebrew is the language of the majority, so it is the country's official language. Almost the entire population speaks it either as native speakers or proficiently as a second language. This country is one which the Middle East has been counted as in highest ranking, having best standard of living. Israel has developed into a technological and entrepreneurial powerhouse on the worldwide scale. Israel was ranked number 5 in the worldwide in the Bloomberg Innovation Index, an annual ranking of countries that analyzes performance in research and development, technology education, and other indicators of technological process. The country has developed a strong educational infrastructure and a high-quality incubation system for new cutting-edge ideas to create value-driven goods and services. These developments have allowed the country to create a high concentration of high-tech companies across the country's regions. Archaeology in Israel involves the systematic investigation of all the remains of the country's past, from prehistory to the end of Ottoman rule. The profusion of material remains is evidence of the many cultures that have left their imprint on the land. Here are some significant events in history of Israel. 931 BCE, after the death of King Solomon, united monarchy is splitted into Kingdom of Israel and Kingdom of Judah. 722 BCE, when the Kingdom of Israel was invaded by Assyrians, and Babylon conquered Judah in the year 586 BCE. 536 BCE, when Cyrus the Great became the new king of the land. 333 BCE, the land conquered by Alexander the Great. In 1940s, State of Israel proclaimed. In exactly May of 1948, Israel got independence with David Ben-Gurion. And in 1950s, attacks of other countries to Israel occurred. 1990s, when the water issues became negotiating chip for Palestinian and Israel. 2000, the conflict between Israel and Palestinian continues. And in 2010, Israel joins the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The development of the country is really involute and confound. Yet, as of now, Israel, or economy of Israel, is really developed and progressive in terms of life expectancy, education, per capita income, and other human development index measures. The country is really advanced.
Today I will talk about the etymology of Hebrew. Hebrew comes from the Old Latin word Hebreus, and Hebrews were ancestors of Samaritan and Jews. And Jews were the descendants of Hebrews, and they claimed to be the descendants of biblical patriarch Abraham. They lived in the ancient Middle East 1400 before Christ, and they settled in Canaan, formerly known as Israel. It is the country in the eastern coast Mediterranean Sea and the territory of modern Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Hebrew is a member of Canaanites group of Semitic languages. It was the language of the early Jews, but from 586 before Christ, it started to be replaced by Aramaic.
Hebrew literature consists of ancient, medieval, and modern writings in the Hebrew language. It is one of the primary forms of Jewish literature, though there have been cases of literature written in Hebrew by non-Jews. So Hebrew literature was produced in many different parts of the world throughout the medieval and modern eras, while contemporary Hebrew literature is largely Israeli literature. So literature in Hebrew begins with oral literature of the Lashon HaKodesh, or the holy language. Since ancient times and with the teachings of Abraham, the first of the biblical patriarch of Israel. Beyond comparison, the most important work of ancient Hebrew literature is the Hebrew Bible, or the Book of Remembrance. During the medieval period, the majority of Jewish and Hebrew literature was composed of Islamic North Africa, Spain, Palestine, and the Middle East. Many works of medieval philosophical literature, such as the Maimonides, Guide to the Perplexed, and the Kuzari, as well as many works of fiction, were written in Judeo-Arabic. So one work of fiction, which was written in Hebrew, was The Fox Tale by Berekia ben Natronai Hanakdan, Hebrew fables which resembles Aesop's fables. So in addition to writing traditional rabbinic literature in Hebrew, modern Jews developed new forms of fiction, poetry, and essay writing, which are typically called the modern Hebrew literature.
Poetry and not prose was the dominant medium in Hebrew literature until the mid-20th century. Edgar Keret was born on 20th day of August 1967 in Ramat Gan, Israel. He is an Israeli writer known for his short stories, graphic novels, and script writing for film and television. His writing style is lean, using everyday language, slang, and dialect. Amos Oz was born Amos Klosner on 4th day of May 1939 in Jerusalem, Mandatory Palestine. He was an Israeli writer, novelist, journalist, and intellectual who is one of Israel's most prolific writers and respected intellectuals, as the New York Times worded it in an obituary. David Grossman is an Israeli author whose fictional works often return to the themes of childhood, grief, and solitude, while his nonfiction shines a spotlight on the dilemmas of life in Israel, the ongoing dispute with the Palestinians, occupation, and the loneliness that comes with being a leftist. Ruth Almond was born on 15th day of May 1936 in Petah Tikva, Mandate, Palestine. She is an Israeli novelist whose writings are recognized for their awareness of the condition of non-belonging in the land of Israel, particularly her first collection of stories, Margarita's Nightly Charities, 1969. Mir Shalab was born in Nahalal, Israel on 29th day of July, 1948. He is an Israeli writer and newspaper columnist for the daily Yediot Aharonot, who is known to never mix fiction with politics, a maxim that sets him apart from his fellow Israeli authors. Instead, Shalab's whimsical and satirical novels are grounded in the historic and legends of Free State Israel. Zeruiah Shalab was born on 13th day of May, 1959 in Wutzat, Kinneret, Israel. She is a best-selling Israeli author whose novels are explorations of the intimate fluctuations of the mind of her characters. She has created unforgettable figures in her four preceding novels: Love Life 2001, Husband and Wife 2004, Thera 2005, and The Remains of Love 2012. Abraham B. Yehoshua is an Israeli novelist, essayist, and playwright, published as A.B. Yehoshua author. He is regarded as a prominent figure in the New Wave generation of Israeli writers who differed from their predecessors in focusing more closely on the individual and on interpersonal concerns rather than by psychology of a group. Yehudit Handel was born on 25th of October 1921 in Warsaw. She was an award-winning Israeli author. She wrote novels, short stories, and nonfiction whose work focuses on the Holocaust, displaced persons, people with depression, and the terminally ill. Yuval Noah Harari was born on 24th day of February 1976 in Kiryat Ata, Israel. He is an Israeli public intellectual, historian, and a professor in the Department of History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. His writings examine free will, consciousness, intelligence, happiness, and suffering. Leah Goldberg was born on 29th day of May 1911 in Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, East Prussia, German Empire. She was a prolific Hebrew language poet, author, playwright, literary translator, and comparative literary researcher whose writings are considered classics of Israeli literature.